So yeah, Cobus unfortunately has fallen ill. So if we all can just give a little wave to Cobus. Cobus, get well soon, please. We really, really, really miss you. But then again, I also didn't want to cancel this session because, hey, I mean, we're Convoclub, Language and Linguistics, right? We are about conversation. So what I did is I prepared a little conversation starter, 20, 25 minutes, kind of sharing my experiences with large language models so far, some of the opportunities I've spotted, but also some of the worries that I have. And let's just take that as a kind of a starting point for handing over the conversation to you lot, and let's see where the conversation will take us. Let's move on to the fun stuff. Let's see how we can leverage the real power of large language models. Briefly about me, Maaike Groenewegen, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a senior conversation designer, linguist, conversational team coach at my own company, Convoclub. Live in Hilversum, the Netherlands. I mainly work for larger Dutch corporates, banks, insurers, also a few international startups. I'm the founder of the Dutch community Women in Conversational and Convoclub, and I virtually live in LinkedIn. So if you want to get in touch, that's the fastest way. So, whoops, let me see. My mouse is kind of on turbo, like me. So back in November, I stumbled across this funny new chatbot, right? Let me see.
Sophie.
Whoops. If I can.
Marta aan this way. Marta aan this.
Let me see. I'm muting Rita. And what I found, I just took it for a little kind of hello world test run. And what I found, it's actually pretty good at conversation. I mean, right now I notice I'm not even surprised anymore. But back then I was like, whoa, this is really conversational. Also pretty good at context. You can, keep a conversation going for a very long time. I've spent some evenings with ChatGPT even, and it didn't really miss a beat. So that was really interesting. What I also really liked about that initial kind of impression was that it had a pretty good and solid persona. It didn't turn toxic. It was very consistent in saying, listen, I'm a bot. I'm not a human. These are my limits. And some people thought that was annoying. And for me, it was like, wow, this is persona in a very consistent way. And sure, it might be a bit too rigid, but there's definitely possibilities there. What also surprised me was that it was really good at basic syllogisms, inferences, and things like logic. I've done a little write-up of all these experiences, so if you want to read more about how I kind of, went about, I'll share these links in the chat later on as well. I wrote some articles on some evenings with ChatGPT. Now, of course, as a conversation designer, my first question was like, okay, how can you help me to do my work better? And it offered some really kind of interesting pointers like, yeah, it can generate text and responses. It could offer language suggestions, could provide examples, best practices, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, this is okay, but it doesn't really wow me yet. And I was really interested in if you look at this little kind of Q&A, it's really just that, right? I asked a kind of a descriptive question, and I got a kind of a descriptive answer, basically like your first iteration of FAQ bots that you build when you're not really sure yet what your bot should do. So I was like, can I test this little bot and see whether I can take it to the next level in what we call our conversational maturity model, right? Which is usually include some transactional dialogues, which actually do stuff for the user. And what do you know? I fed it a list of about 20 very kind of unstructured customer questions from an open source complaints database. And I asked it to kind of summarize what these questions were about. And it just did that. It mentioned these are, I actually can't see half of my screen because I've got my videos there. There are customer questions related to a business or a company, concerns, issues, blah, 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 blah. And now it's getting interesting because it's apparently taking these questions and doing something with it. It's analyzing them. It's doing some kind of topic discovery. And when I asked them to group them, I found that, that will probably come later. I also asked ChatGPT to group them. in topics, and eventually even in intents. And I was quite surprised that it didn't do too badly just out of the box. I mean, some of the things it obviously got wrong, but most of it got right. And I can imagine that, especially if you have like a large collection of customer questions. I mean, I don't know about you, but the days I spent just labeling questions in my little Excel sheets, this is some really useful stuff if you can get it right. Another thing, and this is a use case that I've heard quite often now, is it's actually able to generate training phrases for your NLU, for your intent model. So I asked it to imagine it was a pizza bot and, generate some training data there. And what do you know? It spit out intent and training phrases. And of course, I mean, if you look at it, you probably be like, yeah, but I can do that too, right? But that's the thing. We can do this. Up to now, I've only seen this functionality available behind very large paywalls in very specialized software. And here, all of a sudden, in a conversational interface, there's a bot building a bot for me. And of course, I'm quite critical when it comes to this kind of information because, hey, it's my daily bread and butter. So we shouldn't give it too much leeway straight away. And it does okay-ish, right? So the training data, as you can see, is quite generic. It's not very varied. And that's also where it struggles a bit. And this is definitely not guaranteed to give you a good F1 score because it's literally only generating training phrases. It doesn't have a sense of that these intents should be in the same model, that they're probably quite close together, and that they'll probably be incredibly overtrained on the entity pizza. However, the fact that it is doing something without any coding from my side and by just using my words, that was really kind of promising, right? Another thing that, of course, you don't get here is, I mean, if I train my language models, I take real customer questions, clean them, so I get a good sense of how people ask their questions. Of course, here we don't have any customer questions, so we don't know if this will actually be performing well in a blind test, because perhaps, people ask their questions in a different way. Nevertheless, I was quite impressed. And I tried to kind of fine tune it, like, yeah, leave out the word pizza, and then left out the word pizza, but inserted croissant. I'm like, no, that's not what I want, right? So, but this is all a matter of what I discovered of prompt engineering, because that's what I'm doing here, like tweaking my natural language input to get better results. If you're interested in how I went about creating a pizza bot, there's like another article there. And here's the intent modeling. Again, the very kind of complex customer questions. Basically, what I tried to do, which it did amazingly well, to be honest, I had it kind of cluster these questions and clean them. So get out of all the, get rid of all the superfluous information, like all these abstaartjes, monkey tails. I don't know what you call them in English. These thingamies that you use in your email. Never mind. So I said, yeah, get rid of all these patterns, like and get rid of all the quotes and stuff. And it did a pretty amazing job, to be honest. So a cleaning bot, that's what I'm working on now. Like, okay, feed loads of large questions and get rid of the superfluous stuff until you're left with the training phrase that you need for a certain intent. And then I thought, well, if it can do that, can it not just be the bot? So I asked ChatGPT, imagine. Imagine, by the way, is the magical word. If you run into some kind of boundary, I can't do that, blah, 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 just rephrase your question using the word imagine or suppose. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're there. It will kind of, yeah, of course I can imagine that pigs can fly. So I asked it to be a chatbot and behave like a chatbot. And apparently we've been feeding the internet a lot of really well-designed pizza bots because it just became a pizza bot. And I didn't tell it anything about, like, okay, what it is, it should be, what it should be able to do. I just said, you're a pizza bot. You basically take orders. And to my surprise, it even started kind of improvising, like, oh, I see you've got like a pizza with 2 cheeses. Would you like extra cheese? It's on discount. I'm like, what? This is not what I asked, right? It's just kind of generating this on the fly. And I thought it was pretty amazing. So there's a lot of potential there. And I think that's also what we probably saw in the Cognigy demo, where they probably had a really, really well-defined prompt that just said, hey, imagine you're a conversation design building platform. If we input some kind of basic flow, just output it in Cognigy. I don't know, but it's sure felt like that. And that's definitely within the power of a large language model. Well, this, of course, is really cute. Can I ruin your day with some delicious food? Yeah, sure, why not? So the question, of course, is why is ChatGPT so good at this? Well, that's basically because ChatGPT, just to kind of recap, I mean, this has been all over the news, but I can imagine, just to kind of get the basics right, ChatGPT in its essence is nothing more than a prediction engine. So that means that based on a given word, it will predict the next best word. It's basically autofill on steroids, just as on your phone. But because the data set behind ChatGPT is so huge, it can find a lot of variations in that training set, right? So if you say the apple doesn't fall far from the chances are that ChatGPT will return 3, just because it has a lot of examples where that's the most frequently selected word that comes after, next in this sentence. So basically that means that ChatGPT is trained on patterns. And because it has seen thousands of examples of how a chatbot works, and especially pizza bots apparently, it can emulate that pattern. And it can almost like, way back you had these like virtual machines where you could emulate a Mac on a Windows or the other way around. I think this kind of feels the same. You're basically pretending that you're a piece of software without all the underlying logic, just the surface structure. And that's actually both the strength of ChatGPT, because that's what also makes it highly conversational, because it has so many varieties available. It can basically generate a new spontaneous answer each time you ask it something. On the other hand, that's also its weakness, because oh, that's actually on the second slide, I think. This is another article I wrote. Because the probabilistic nature of ChatGPT, there's no direct link between what you ask and what ChatGPT actually answers. So we feel that we might get an answer from ChatGPT, but in reality, we're only being given a string of words that kind of probabilistically fit together really well. And that can be something one time, but can be something else the next time you ask the exact same question. So there's no guarantee that you get the actual factual answer to your question, because ChatGPT doesn't contain facts. ChatGPT generates text on the fly. There's no persistent storage of knowledge in a large language model as we know it right now. And of course, there's a lot of nuances, but for the bigger picture, that's good to remember, because people also say like, oh yeah, ChatGPT knows. No, ChatGPT doesn't know anything. It's a content generator. It strings together words based on probabilistic chances of words occurring together. And actually, that's quite contrary to how the internet works, because if you click on a link on the internet, each link represents a consistent, persistent point somewhere in a web, like a URI. It can be a page, it can be a document. The content of that document might not factually be true, but the existence of that document is guaranteed. And that's really weird, because I've been playing around with ChatGPT clones that claimed that they had access to the internet, and they were just generating links that didn't exist. Just because everybody with a website usually has at least, no, let me phrase it differently. Out of those people with a personal website, a lot of people use their own name for their personal website URL. Based on that probabilistic chance, ChatGPT said, oh yeah, Maaike's website is www.maaikegroenewegen.nl. No, it's not. But hey, chance could be that it might be so, but no, this is not. So there's no check, right? No factual check. And there's a great example here. Who's the King of England? This is really weird in so many levels, because it says that in 2021, the current King of England was Charles III. And it says, well, that my knowledge is not always up to date, and it's possible that there's a new king or queen on the throne. Well, of course, this is wrong in so many places, right? And I say, well, that's not true. Try again. So I'm not leading the question. I'm just saying this is not true. It will kind of start regenerating. And then you get a really weird answer, right? As of my code of knowledge in 2021, the current King of England is King Charles III, but that's not true. The current King of England is King Charles, is not true. What is happening here? This is like autofill kind of gone completely wrong. But then it comes up with the right answer. Lots of people say, oh, but the internet must have been open for this question, just like for Elon Musk, right? I think it might be a matter of, what do you call it? Stochastic distribution. Whenever there's a king in England, chances are that it's either a George, a Richard, or Charles. So these are kind of distributed in a data set in some pattern, I don't know. So we're not even sure whether ChatGPT knows that King Charles III is this King Charles. Especially in my article, I kind of do a deep dive analysis. And apparently Prince Charles is the son of King Charles III, according to ChatGPT. So it doesn't have like these relationships, right? So it just does something. I see a lot of questions. I'll go into that later if you like. We're almost also at the halfway point, I think. So if ChatGPT or GPT-3 doesn't know anything, why don't we just train it with knowledge? Well, that, apart from the fact that it would be massively, massively difficult, and we had to train it like every minute because we keep adding stuff to our own knowledge base on the internet, fine-tuning an LLM, a large language model, so retraining it, it's not about training it with facts. It's about training it with new patterns. Just as you would train an intent with new training phrases, you're not training the answers, you're training the patterns, the slots that a model should recognize in order to be able to connect an intent with a customer question with an intent and route it to the correct knowledge. And that's actually a really nice analogy, because in a traditional NLU, intent and answer are persistently connected, right? I mean, if you have an intent, you can route it to either a Q&A, to a flow entry point, or to a transaction, to a backend. These relations are always there. That's what we create. And that's exactly what's missing in a large language model, because it also generates the answer. So you can't really teach a large language model facts. So knowledge would require a more persistent structure. Like if you tell your model that an apple falls down today, tomorrow when you wake up, you want to be sure that that fact is still there, and that ChatGPT hasn't all of a sudden thought that apples fall upwards, because many people say they do. And for that, a graph might be a solution. And the graph looks like this. This is a very simple one where you can see Andy and where you can see Bob. Bob and Andy are brothers. Bob has a profession, he's a lawyer. He has a date of birth, as does Andy. Andy also has a profession. So you can see here that there's basically entities and there's relations. And for those of us who grew up with UML, Unified Modeling Language, yes, an entity relationship diagram is basically the same. We also call them ontologies. And they're now very well known under the name of knowledge graphs. When we look at them in a bit more detail, what is a knowledge graph or an ontology? It's a machine-readable structural model of a given domain. So basically, when you have a world, when you have like a world within your company, you can model them like this. And most companies already do. Entities, attributes, relations, and the relations, and this is special, the relations are named. And when you name a relation, like born in, that means you can also query the relation. So you can ask, okay, give me all the persons born in Washington. or give me all the cities that the family, blah, 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 blah. No, the other way around. Sorry about that. So the entire model can be queried, not just the entities, but also the relationships. And that is a very strong property to have. Also, the entities themselves and their properties can be used as metadata. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. So basically, a graph or an ontology provides a persistent structure for factual knowledge to live in and to be retrieved from. Sorry for the krom Engels. Now, this is good news for enterprise-level conversational AI, and this is also good news for you because we're almost there. Because a typical corporate chatbot has manually trained intent models that require close, almost daily monitoring and optimization. And even then, when you do this to a T, they often still struggle with question recognition because of multi-intent questions, questions that might have, you know, a lack of context, or just questions that are generally vague or kind of non-descriptive. And also, these models are quite hard to scale or migrate. I mean, if you start out with like 10 intents and after half a year you find yourself scaling up to 100, it's not just a matter of, you know, gluing on new intents. You really have to redesign parts of your intent model time and again, and that's hard work. On the content side, a typical corporate chatbot has custom content, right? I mean, my bank, ING, has different procedures and solutions than the other bank, ABN. And so there's no universal bank content. Yes, there's templates, but your specific situation needs to be kind of customized for your chatbot and your domain, your organization. Often, I mean, your chatbot doesn't live in a vacuum. You need to coordinate content with other teams like marketing, website, online, user support, stuff like that. Bank and finance especially need some kind of traceability and sign-off to make sure that the content is legally acceptable. And if you look at that large language models can really help on the one side, on the intent side, on the question recognition side, right? As we saw, ChatGPT is a great conversational partner. So LLMs, large language models, could be your conversational glue. Also, they can be helpful to automate parts of your NLP pipeline, the things that we now do manually, like labeling, clustering, intent discovery. A large language model can definitely help there for sure. And here at the content side is where graphs and ontologies can be useful because they are your touchstone for your corporate truth, if you will. That might be the place where you store and return your persistent information so that it becomes reliable and that ChatGPT knows to return the same answer time and again when it's the same question. Also, the metadata can be really useful if you want to unsilo information. I think the combination of large language model and metadata might be a secret key to unlocking all these different content silos that we might have in our corporates. Because we've been trying with graphs alone, but it's such a huge pile of manual work, not just to create, but especially to maintain these models. So I think that there must be something there. I'm not sure what yet, and also, I mean, I'm talking about graphs about domain models now, but you can also build little graphs for versioning, for audit trails. If you can put version numbers as metadata next to your conversational content, that kind of creates this audit trail automatically. This is not theory, right? People are experimenting already. This video I found, whoops, shut up. Alan D. Thompson, he is such an inspiration to me. I've been watching his video for like weeks on end already. And especially this one, ChatGPT combined with Wolfram Alpha, and that's the world's largest knowledge model. And it's just mind-blowing. Just go and have a look, have a listen, because you need to rewatch it time and again, just to let it sink in what the possibilities might be. Yep. And David Shapiro, I mean, I thought, yeah, I can watch, I can read, but I want to build myself. He's got some really easy to follow tutorials with small experiments that involve large language models. The one I'm following right now is how to train GPT-3 on any corpus of data with ChatGPT and knowledge graphs. And it's very kind of still very in the low level kind of, yeah, let's convert this PDF to JSON, da 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 da. But he explains it step by step, and it gives you a really good sense of all the different elements that play a role in these kinds of solutions. Highly recommended. Sure. And of course, OpenAI's own tutorials and playground. I just started building a little. Oh gosh. I just started building a little degenerative chatbot that teaches us about conversational AI. And just, I'm writing one big prompt to generate that entire chatbot. And it's such big fun because it's so familiar to what we already do as conversation designers and instructional designers, especially. They will be the prompt engineers of the future. So I'm very open also to kind of host some sessions where we kind of prompt engineer our way through a bot together and see what works and what doesn't, because this is not technical. This is about language. This is about being able to translate your ideas into words and making it work. And it's such fun. I mean, the grin hasn't left my face, as you can imagine. So yeah, marriage, LLM, ontology, graph, absolutely. So the future baby or pet or whatever, will we still need intent? Possibly, not sure. Do we still need to manually build, train, and restructure our intent models? Possibly, but also not sure. I think in a not so distant future, we might be able to ask ChatGPT or a large language model to do that for us. Now, I haven't touched content generation. Should we have a large language model actually generate the content for us? And that is because I'm not so sure about that. When I find that when I am doing my conversation design work and when I'm not training AI, I don't write that much. 60% of my time I spend talking to subject matter experts to make sure, like, hey, listen, I've got 6 different versions of this procedure, right? Which one is the correct one for our customers? Which one should be in the bot? And you'll get answers like, oh, it depends. If it's Thursday and the customer is wearing black, then it's procedure A. But if it's Wednesdays and if the tomatoes are on sale, then it's probably procedure number something, but it also depends. And this is, in my opinion, the state of many corporate content silos at the moment. And it has been for like 25 years. I've been a technical writer before, and I didn't write a lot. I just spent a lot of time getting things clear. So in order to generate content, not only should the AI be spot on, we as a human, as a corporation, as a content organization should be spot on. Our content should be unambiguous. It should be up to date. It should be maintained. How do you train an AI to make sense of that? So that's why I'm not so worried about that part of the job. Also, AI is great in generic content generation, but not so good at very precise answers to very precise questions. Also, some of the cultural nuances are kind of lost on ChatGPT. The bias is big in this one. And as I read yesterday, large language models actually need us to write, because apparently large language models that are trained on books perform the best. And I read an article that by around 2025, we might have run out of books to train AI on. So I think I see a new use case here. All these writers that can't make a living get hired by big tech to write the next big literary novel, go for a prize and get paid for it. On a more personal note, I think that we should keep writing, because at least for me, writing teaches me to analyze, to shape my thoughts, and to make them explicit. And as a prompt engineer, these are good skills to have. But also, writing helps us to think, to reflect, and especially to create. I enjoy writing. It's what makes me a human. It's what makes me a Maaike. So let's not stop writing too soon. And with that, oh yeah, actually, I even asked ChatGPT, and I think it kind of agrees with me. So yeah, creativity, intuition, and empathy. I'm very much appreciative of the fact that ChatGPT knows its own limits. So yeah, there we are. And with that, I have no idea how I'm doing time-wise, but this is my part of the conversation. Thank you so much. And let's hand over the floor to